This week on YCN Vermont Wrap, we'll take a look at some of the top news stories from the past few days from across the state, and no political potpourri this week because Vermont State Senator John Rodgers will be joining us from the Northeast Kingdom. We'll discuss the gubernatorial race in the Green Mountain State and get his take on calls being echoed across the state for him to run for governor via a write-in campaign. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. I'm Keith Hanson. Governor Phil Scott yesterday vetoed a second budget bill, pushing the state even closer to a governmental shutdown slated to occur on the 1st of July. Scott said that he would not support a budget bill without confidence that the state's legislative leaders could, quote, achieve level property taxes, or without an amendment which would block increases to non-residential property taxes. The governor went on to say that if state lawmakers don't agree with him, that they're free to attempt a veto override. Both Senate President Pro Tem Tim Ashe and House Speaker Mitzi Johnson expressing their disappointment in the governor's veto actions. The governor's administration has not yet outlined any sort of backup plan in the event of the governmental shutdown or indicated which sections of the state government would remain unaffected by the looming July 1st shutdown. Vermont State Police continue to investigate the January death of 11-month-old Carson Rickert of Ludlow, Vermont. On Wednesday, Vermont State Police officials announced that an autopsy by the New Hampshire Chief Medical Examiner's Office and subsequent investigation determined that the cause of Carson's death was asphyxia due to strangulation or smothering, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. Carson Rickert is the son of Abigail Wood and Nicholas Rickert. Emergency personnel responded to the Ludlow residence Abigail Wood shares with her boyfriend, Tyler Palander Savory, back on January 11th for a report of an unresponsive infant. Carson Rickert was later pronounced dead at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire. Vermont State Police officials are continuing to investigate that incident. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Sergeant Mike Dion of the Vermont State Police Major Crimes Unit at 802-722-4600. Does the key to solving societal problems lie within the simple act of forcing consumption on that society's population? Well, your Republican governor thinks so. Just as forcing every homeless person to go out and buy a house would solve the homelessness issue, and forcing every person with a drug addiction into treatment centers, that would wipe away the scourge of the opioid crisis. Well, so too will forcing people to purchase health insurance plans cure the ills of the bloated, wasteful monstrosity known as the healthcare industry in the state of Vermont. Remember the attempts by Shumlin in 2014 to push through a single-payer healthcare system? Well, your lawmakers are back at it again. Last week, Governor Scott, a Republican, signed into law a requirement that all be covered or pay a penalty. That move came 2 days before New Jersey's Democratic Governor Phil Murphy signed a virtually identical law into effect in that state. Evidently, New Jersey serves as the perfect role model for the state of Vermont. The two Phils, one Democrat and one Republican, seem to agree that forcing people to purchase a product that many will not use and that many more deem completely unaffordable has bipartisan appeal. Vermont state lawmakers are tasked with writing the rules for enforcing that new law, which kicks in 2020. That gives you plenty of time to find another state with a better economic culture, a better educational system, lower taxes, and a more favorable stand on personal protection with firearms to move to. No word yet on whether or not the penalties for not purchasing the coverage will include possible suspension or revocation of your driver's license, but rumor has it that that is an option that is being very closely considered. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, Vermont State Senator John Rodgers will join me from Glover in the Northeast Kingdom. We'll talk about his possible gubernatorial run as a Democrat, which is being supported by Republicans. We'll be right back. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. I'm Keith Hanson. Following the very public spectacle, dare I even say the photo opportunity media circus, which occurred on April 11th, that's when Governor Phil Scott signed Senate Bill 55 into law, Second Amendment advocates across the state collectively offered up a vote of no confidence in Governor Scott, vowing to see him replaced for an act that many saw, at best, an act of betrayal to party ideals, and of course, at worst, a blatant act of treason and an abdication of his oath to office. And before the ink was even dry on that derelict document, a significant portion of the state who felt betrayed began to drop names of people they were willing to support in an effort to jettison Vermont's chief executive. One of the names being mentioned more and more frequently is current Vermont State Senator John Rodgers, a Democrat representing the Essex-Orleans District. He joins me from Glover in the Northeast Kingdom. Senator, welcome.
Thank you, Keith.
The first question to you is, will you run for governor for the state of Vermont and challenge incumbent Governor Phil Scott, a Republican, if you receive sufficient votes on August 14th during the state's primary?
Yeah, Keith, I've told my supporters that if they can pull off this grassroots write-in campaign, that I will be all in if they get me over the hump in the primary.
Now, Senator, we've really got to address the elephant in the room, and please forgive me for invoking the symbol of the Republican Party, but it's kind of appropriate because you're not a Republican, but you are and have been a registered Democrat, yet Republicans, and yes, even those who identify strongly as conservative, are announcing that they'll support you via the write-in campaign. So what does this say about the current political climate in the state of Vermont when even conservatives are willing to vote for a member of the opposing party, and at that, a party that is operated on a platform of ideals that often stand in stark contradistinction to conservative ideals?
Well, I think I'm an old school Democrat. My grandfather was a Democrat, and I like to think that I'm more like him than I am like the Vermont Democratic Party is today. I think they've shifted tremendously left. And even when I came into the House in 2003, there were a bunch of conservative Democrats and moderate Democrats who were very centrist and worked well with the Republicans. And that's, I think, one of the things that's appealing to a lot of Vermonters about me is that I have worked in a nonpartisan fashion the entire time I've been there, and everyone that I've dealt with has always known I'm a very strong Second Amendment supporter.
Now, you mentioned terms like old school Democrat and conservative. I have to ask, what does that mean? We use these terms all the time. The media uses them certainly, and we use them in political discussions. You see them in social media. But to you, what does it mean to be an old school Democrat? And I think more appropriately, what does it mean to be a conservative?
Well, I think the way I grew up had a lot to do with it. I grew up on a dairy farm. We didn't have a lot of money. We were fiscally conservative, and that's how I am in government as well. Also a strong supporter of the Constitution and freedoms and protections for everyone. I think both the First and the Second Amendment are extremely important, and I think without the Second Amendment, we'll lose the First Amendment.
Well, historically and very recently, your party has made it very clear that it supports gun control. And talking about fiscal responsibility and fiscal conservatism, these are concepts and ideals that are really breaking from the orthodox Democratic position. How do these positions that you have, talking about fiscal conservatism and support of the First Amendment and certainly the Second Amendment, how has this affected your relationship with the Democratic Party in the state of Vermont?
Well, I made it pretty clear when I was first elected to the House in 2003 that I wasn't just going to follow leadership, that I was really more intent on supporting my constituents, the people who voted me in. And I come from a conservative area of the state. So I've never been a partisan person. I don't get with the party platform. I base all my judgments on the information at hand, and I'm, I guess, quite a lot different than a lot of the Democrats there who just follow party leadership.
So I guess, Senator, the question begs to be asked, why stick with that party? Why not jump ship and go Republican or even independent or libertarian?
Well, I guess just because I've always considered myself a Democrat, I feel more like the party has left me. So I don't really feel like I should have to change. I wish the party would come back towards the center where we started from. But I don't really know if I fit in any party today.
Initially, it appeared as though you'd given some thought to running, at least before the expiration date of the filing period, and had decided against it, only to make the decision to indeed move forward with this gubernatorial run, seems like within the past 24 hours. What was it that really pushed you over the edge to make you say, yeah, I'm going to do this?
Well, it's a really unconventional way to go about it, but what I decided early on before the petitions were due is that I have a small construction business. I'd made a bunch of commitments. That's how I make my living. I didn't want to back out on those commitments. I have a comfortable place in the Senate where I'm able to get a lot of good work done, and I have a shot at a chair next year. And I decided taking on a statewide campaign against an incumbent would just take all of my time, and so I wouldn't have time to put into my business and spend with my family, and I decided that I'm a young enough guy that I would wait. But what happened after the petitions were filed and the deadline had passed, I was still getting calls and emails and messages from a lot of folks around the state who felt like they had no one they could support and no one that was going to back what was important to them. And so some of them asked me if they could write my name in, and I said, sure, I would be fine with that. I said, I'm not going to raise money or spend money or campaign in the traditional sense unless they get me through the primary. And there's quite a grassroots movement has started up. So I feel more like Vermonters recruited me, and I'm willing to serve the state if Vermonters want me to do that.
Now, you were one of the people in the Senate who had a very vocal voice in opposition to S-55, so I could pretty much figure out what your answer is going to be, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. If you were sitting in the governor's chair on April 11th, what would your response have been when S-55 was presented to you for your signature?
Oh, I would have vetoed the thing instantly. It's a poorly prepared bill. It was built by floor amendments. It's got so many holes in it, it's unbelievable. The governor's now going around with what he calls a fact sheet that explains what he thinks it does and doesn't do, and his fact sheet isn't even right. The city of Montpelier just tried to get new handguns for the police department, and we cannot import the new Glocks into Vermont anymore, the very sidearms that all of our police forces want. They have banned the importation of over 60 different firearms in that bill. I literally can't pass down my rifle magazines of over 10 rounds to my children or grandchildren or anybody else. The bill is just a complete disaster. The governor's always talking about economics and bringing money into the state. That bill just got rid of all of our shooting competitions, all of our exhibitions, which bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars to the state, have never been a problem. And the other thing it did is I think we just sent a huge amount of business to New Hampshire gun shops.
So let me ask you this. What to you does the Second Amendment represent? Why is the Second Amendment in the enumerated Bill of Rights? Why is it a part of the Constitution? And do you think it's coincidence that it just happens to be the second enumerated right on that Bill of Rights?
No, I do not. I think our forefathers were more insightful than government officials have been for many, many years. And we are supposed to try to solve our problems with words, and that's why I got involved in politics. But the Second Amendment is for the protection of ourselves and our country, our democracy, if those words stop working. And we've seen conflicts around the world, and for some reason, Americans think we're immune to all of it, and I don't believe we are. And so I feel very strongly that citizens should have the right to keep and bear arms, and that includes some of the stuff that the legislature just banned.
We're going to take a quick break. I'll be back with more of my discussion with Vermont State Senator John Rodgers right after this. Welcome back to YCN Vermont Wrap. I'm Keith Hanson. I'm joined by current Vermont State Senator John Rodgers, a Democrat representing the Essex-Orleans District. He joins me from Glover in the Northeast Kingdom. Senator, again, thank you for being a part of the program this week.
Thank you, Keith.
Now, Senator, I don't want to make this all about guns because being governor isn't centered solely on gun issues and Second Amendment issues, but make no mistake about it, you're here right now because of the decision Phil Scott made to sign into law restrictions on certain aspects of firearm ownership. So in a roundabout way for you, your introduction into this race is about guns. And with that being said, I've always said that for me personally, and what I do, I am a conservative advocacy journalist. I advocate for ideals like limited government, reduced taxation, personal responsibility, draining the swamp. So I'd be derelict in my duties in that capacity if I didn't express even a small degree of skepticism here, with all due respect. Putting my faith in a Democrat is, in essence, taking the cobra's word that he's not going to bite me when I pick him up. How would you respond to people who are looking at this with a degree of skepticism and are hesitant to put their faith in a person who's an avowed Democrat, knowing full well what today's Democratic Party stands for and represents?
Yeah, I think everybody should be skeptical, and quite frankly, we have a lot of problems in our democratic system, starting with the flawed primary system and not enough people getting off their butts and going to vote. So I hope they are skeptical, and I hope they do their homework. And I think if they do their homework and look at my record, and I was in the House for 8 years. I've been in the Senate for 6 years. I have a pretty substantial record, and they can check that out. And, I'll back it up. I have been fiscally responsible and, trying to promote the economy. And I'm right there with you on small government and keeping, I am a bit of a libertarian. I don't think government should mess with people unless they're hurting or bothering other people. Good people should be left alone to pursue their life, liberty, and happiness.
And I got to be honest, I mean, my hat's off and my deepest respect to anybody from any party who's willing to jump in feet first into a political race. It certainly is an admirable undertaking, and I'm sure quite a stressful one. So one of the key questions here that I think a lot of people have, and certainly from my perspective, are there any issues that you could identify that Vermonters are facing right now that you feel would be best solved or addressed using the Democratic platform, a Democratic set of ideals, as opposed to those of the Republican Party?
Well, I think there's some things that the Republican Party has stood against that I don't agree with. Back to what I was just stating before about being a bit of a libertarian. Not very many Republicans supported the marijuana bill, and I am in total support of the marijuana bill. I don't see marijuana as being any worse than alcohol. And we tried prohibition on alcohol, it didn't work. We tried prohibition on marijuana, it hasn't worked. Fact is, the United States drug policy is an epic failure that is wasted billions of dollars, and the drug problem keeps getting worse. On some of the social issues, the Republicans have not been in favor of freedom to marry and end-of-life choices and that sort of stuff. And there again, I support good people. And quite frankly, I don't care if those people, I don't care about their race, their religion, their sex, their sexual orientation. If they're good people, we take care of them. If they're bad people, we hold them accountable.
Senator, I've got about 60 seconds left here. I'm going to give you the final word.
Well, I think if Vermonters want somebody who's going to be upfront and honest, I'm an open book. I tell it like I see it, and I'm that guy. I'm not going to change. Some people think I'm a little unrefined and rough around the edges, and I'm okay with that because I think a lot of Vermonters can relate to that. I'm a citizen legislator. I go home, I work hard, and I do everything I can for my constituents and for the people of Vermont.
Vermont State Senator John Rodgers, representing the Essex-Orleans District. I want to thank you so much for being a part of the program this weekend, and look to get you back on the program soon, possibly for a debate. Would you be open to that?
I'd be interested, sure.
Okay, very good. Senator, thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Keith.
That's going to do it for this week's edition of YCN Vermont Wrap. I want to extend my sincerest gratitude to State Senator John Rodgers for joining me on the show this week. And as always, be sure to share with me your thoughts about this week's program. Email is keithontheair@gmail.com. That's keithontheair@gmail.com. Be sure to let me know the town that you live in as well, please. And be sure to follow me on Twitter @RealKeithHanson. That's @RealKeithHanson on Twitter. Have a great weekend, everybody.